Namaste. Welcome back. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to part 6 of this discussion of the Marseille honors, or the near Marseille honors, shall we say, as we are looking at many non-traditional decks in this series. My name is Sadhana, and I've been reading tarot for more than 25 years and just fascinated. Just as I was getting ready to come on, something really caught my eye and decided to pull out another card to bring into our discussion today. And this is a ever evolving journey for me, learning so much in every deep dive, every path I wander, regardless of the type of cards that I'm looking at. I'm so fascinated with this. There is a lifelong journey of reflection, self-reflection, and discovery in studying the tarot, and I can't say enough about this. Anyway, this is a mini part of a year-long revisiting of the Tarot de Marseille for me. And on Saturdays, I've been doing these mini little sections, and we're in the court cards right now, in the honors. Hi, Dee, welcome. All right, and today's little tangent, or that's not the right word, today's shift in direction, I think I want to talk about the Knight of Swords first. And what sort of came up as I was reviewing a comment made by Jodorowsky. And I've been reading lots of books, lots and lots of books. And I wanted to see if this was consistent across decks, this observation. And I do have the Kamwan Jodorowsky deck on the table as well, too. I perhaps should... why don't I get that out here? We'll have these. This is the Gassman Tarot. And I'll get Jodorowsky's here as well, too, so we can compare. Okay, and today's conversation is primarily going to be about the Suit of Swords, but I just want to start with this little bit of a diversion here. I found this really interesting. And I did mention this before, and I suppose we'll talk about more about this when we get into the major arcana, and I haven't even begun to dive there yet. So one of the things that Jodorowsky says about the Knight of Swords is that the direction that he is charging is a comment. And the Knight of Swords is charging back towards the hearts, back towards the cups. That he has, now I'm paraphrasing, in some way intellectualized, thought through a process, and is now understanding that the only path is the path of love. The only way is the way of love. I have never heard this interpretation before, so I thought, okay. Now, me and my Golden Dawn deep study, Wands, Cups, Swords, Pentacles. Okay, so swords, if we go backwards, we go back to cups. But I know that's not what Jodorowsky is talking about, because generally speaking, in Tarot de Marseille, the suits are not presented Wands, Cups, Swords, Pentacles. There's a different order. Often swords comes first. So I am looking at his diagram early on in the beginning. I mean, the beginning of that book is just, the Way of Tarot is so full of wisdom. And I just need to get this on the table. Okay. So the suits, according to this book, he describes them in terms of the figures around the world card. Now, if you have been studying Golden Dawn correspondences for a while, this is going to, you're going to go, what? Because this is going to be different. And for me, this is something, honestly, when I first started studying the tarot, I think intuitively, this is the way that I read the world card. And then when I started studying the Golden Dawn correspondences, I learned how it was interpreted. So we are looking at the suit of earth, and I don't think that is contestable with the bull, with the cow. And here we have the wands with fire, with the lion. And the energy, I just want to read this to you. The energies of wands and pentacles are placed in the square of the earth. They form the base of all living species capable of reproducing, human or animal. However, up at the top, he says that the angel represents cups. So if you read this Golden Dawn Ways, you'll know that this is the water bearer and Aquarius in the element of air. Okay, but he's saying that in the Tarot of Marseille, this is the suit of cups, and this is the angel for the emotion. And over here is air, and air is swords. So up at the top, we have swords and cups. So I'm sort of introducing two things at the same time here today. And so what I am taking from that earlier comment about this in playing cards, yes, D as well too. Yeah. What I am taking from that comment by Jodorowsky is that if this is air and that is cups, then the knight is charging from in this direction. And I think that's what he's referring to, is that connection of the elements. Now, interestingly, he says that the energy of cups and swords are placed in the square of the sky, the heaven square. They presume an awareness of specifically human energy. So human energy is at the top, animal energy is at the bottom. And for me, this is a very different way of looking at the world card. But I was most interested in what he was referring to in that this Knight of Swords is charging back to, let's put these back in their right piles, charging back to this place of love. He now knows that love conquers all. The answer is love. Okay, so this is the Gassman Tarot. And I think I will just approach this Valet, Cavalier, Reines, and Roi. And we can talk about that other order of the court card presentation. Maybe I will discuss that once we get through all of these honors, because I think that's an interesting association as well too. Okay, so shall we start with the valet and compare the valet across a few different swords suits? The valet as the messenger, and this being the valet of air. I was laughing at one of the books I was reading about how dangerous an occupation this is. When I think about the idea of the messenger of, like, this is the messenger, right? The valet of air. The valet of air is the one who is the envoy, the one who delivers the messages between king and king, between one part of the war and the other part of the war. This is the valet who risks being shot if the message being received isn't a good one. You know, this is kind of a dangerous occupation. This valet it's interesting because the way that the valet is pictured feels to me like a tremendous amount of naivety, not quite knowing what to do with the sword. So let's look at the gaze of this valet. Let's look at the body language of the valet. This is the Tarot of Rivsalt. And I think it's kind of interesting that now this is a very different one. That the Yonasayos really steps away from the classical tarot. And remember that this is the Jack, right? This is in the original, in playing cards, we had 3 honors. We had Jack, Queen, and King. And it is the Knight that is the extra one. And so I think historically, I think in the tarot, we kind of have this morphing of energy between page and knight. Which one is actually the deliverer of messages? Which one is the messenger? That correspondence gets a little confusing, I think, in the tarot. So the Page of Swords, generally speaking, holds a sword in their left hand, and we'll look at hands. And in their right hand, they have some kind of a jousting stick, some kind of another weapon for their protection, which indeed they will need. I think, interesting. That's a really interesting question, Dee. Does this young person gaze down wishing he had a horse? And your second part of that question, I think I can read at a really interesting level. I mean, because of their rank, because of their low level in the court, of course, they don't have a horse. Maybe they also gaze down at the earth. They gaze down at the long journey that is ahead of them. I wonder if they gaze down as well, too, in choice. I hadn't really thought about that because the action of the sword, the message of the sword is on one side. And so in their right hand, they have a stick and they look down at the stick. And the stick is down, the sword is up. The sword is in the receptive hand. I think it's really, it's kind of poignant. And one thing that I think right now is that the stick in the right hand feels more playful, and the sword in the left hand feels more responsible. They have a responsibility to deliver a message. They have a responsibility to, and as far as the pages, learning and student and so forth, I feel a lot of compassion for the student. You know, maybe they're not allowed to go out and join the jousting club because their parents require them to get a degree first. Their parents require them to read so many texts before they watch television and so forth. There's a interesting play between the right hand and the left hand here. Now, I don't get that vibe in the Yonasayos tarot. In other tarots where we're not necessarily looking at a traditional, here is another one. This is La Corte de Tarot Key. This is Very interesting body language. Almost looks as if it is a dance. It is a jester. And I know we had that jester energy, that the clothing for sure in the Gassman Tarot, and the way with the puffy sleeves and so forth. You can really see that clearly, that the page had both the role. And I know the Fool takes on some of that energy as well too, but certainly the pages. Is it the scabbard that's in the right hand? Oh, okay, maybe it is. Okay, let's look. Are they deciding to put the sword back in the scabbard, not a stick, but a scabbard? Yes, I think you're probably right, and I don't know why. I don't know why I would, why that would come to mind. That's so interesting because yes, of course you're right. So if we look at it that way, the page is carefully, and isn't it interesting because if I was putting a sword back in a scabbard, I would have the scabbard in the left hand and have the sword in the right hand. Just because of my dexterity. So if they are a lefty, then this would make sense. If they are right hand dominant, this would require a tremendous amount of precision, really, to put that sword back in the scabbard of the non-dominant, right? With the non-dominant hand, controlling that heavy sword and putting it into the scabbard, for sure. Yeah. In the other new deck that I got, which is the Fine dalla Torre, is that right? Fine dalla Torre, where's my box? We don't see that either. Fine dalla Torre, yeah, this one. We may have a shield. And I get a sense that in 3 of these 4 decks that are on the table, we are outside. Now, I am it's funny the way that came to mind. And one of the things that I've learned in studying the tarot is that sometimes I see odd things and I wonder if I'm seeing them for a reason or not. And yeah, it's whether it is a baton or a scabbard, I guess that we can leave that up to the individual reader's interpretation, but I'm quite certain that traditionally it is indeed a scabbard. Yeah. Okay, so what I want to do is compare the body language and the direction and what is going on between the valet and the knight, and just kind of look at the different energy here. Now what's really interesting is they both face the same direction. And if we look at the queen, she's also facing the same direction. And we did this with some of the other suits as well too, to see which player, which honor And I wonder, now I need to go back and look at them to see if each of the suits has one honor that looks or has body language in a different direction. And in this case, it's the king that looks in the other direction. The queen, the knight, and the valet all look, as Jodorowsky says, to the heart. They look to love. Whereas the king looks to the future, looks to wisdom, looks to what's ahead, is aware how important it is to perspective is to keep looking ahead. Yeah. So interesting that in this suit, it is the king that looks ahead. Now, the other piece that's really kind of fun with this king is that this is the king that wears the same epaulette as the chariot. So what is the connection between the charioteer and the King of Swords? Because this is a symbol that we see very clearly. Now, do we see it in some, I'm just curious here if we see it in, not in some of the non-traditional decks. But let's talk about that first. What could that possibly mean? Whether you're looking at that through a researched connection in one of your tarot books, or whether you're thinking about this through your understanding of what the chariot represents, where the chariot sits in the major arcana, and why the king might be looking over his left shoulder. And these two moons, it's on one hand, I feel as if the king is looking to a sun leaving, looking to a knight that is leaving, wishing that they could be on horseback, leaving too. They are looking ahead and moving ahead. That energy of the chariot, I always feel, is taking us beyond and ahead and outside of the city and onto the next part of our lives. It's a very important journey card. And while the Cavalier d'Epée returns, goes back, chooses love, I love that interpretation. The Knight of Swords is removed from that. That's not something that they know well or feel comfortable with. Their job, their role, their energy is one that is deeply rooted in the intellect and the mind. This is a highly clever individual. And I don't know what you've read about what is in the left hand of the King of Swords. This king also has two objects in hand. I've heard it read as a ruler. Sometimes I think you can see lines on it. You can actually see the lines in the Jodorowsky deck. But I'm feeling if this is some sort of a ruler or a measurer, again, it's a it's too small to be a scabbard. I think it has to do with the precision and how controlled and just how difficult this court is. There is so much value on what is measured and what is known. So I think this is a really interesting thought here. The other three While they are definitely rooted in this energy of the Suit of Swords, they look back yearningly at love or love lost. The king doesn't have any time for that. Patience, interest at all for that. He's looking ahead to a rather ordered, known life, not comfortable with the unknown. And of course, love is unknown, it's unpredictable. And so I'm curious, those of you like come back and if you have more information about what this object is or what this might represent, let me know. Okay. We can continue to explore that. The queen has a hand on her belly. Why? What is she covering? What is she protecting? Is she simply, is she pregnant? Does she have a hand, a motherly hand on an uncomfortable belly? The other thought is that this is a scar. There's a scar under here. Maybe this is from a cesarean section. Maybe this is from some other kind of wound. And maybe one of the reasons why the Queen of Swords is cold, ice queen, bitch, divorcee, alone, is because she knows that scar. I'm going to go back to Dee's comment because I just thought of something else too. The hard suit honors have young kings that fought for their thrones. Soft suits appear more confident in the power. Yeah. I knew a King of Swords very well. I was married to one. It's a there's so much pride in a King of Swords and an unrelenting quality in so many ways. They own their throne. They honestly feel that it is their right to sit upon that throne. Yeah. And look at the color of the swords. Okay, so because we are looking at red, red, and notice how this is red. Do you think it's possible that the only sword in these 4 cards that is not sheathed is the page? All the other ones are sheathed. I wonder if that is possible. Let's look at the colors in this deck. That's really cool, actually. I hadn't thought about that. I don't know where my other queen went. Don't have that many cards on the table today. King, king. She's taken a walk. Okay. I will find her. She will come back to the table. So, I don't know. Have you thought about that? Here she is. It's red. Okay, let's look at the ribso. So in this one, it's kind of silver, blue, metallic with the scabbard. And then this is a really big sword. And so here's something. You may come up with observations that you see something, or you ask a question that you didn't read about in a book, or you haven't heard somebody else say. Can you let that personal insider observation be true? And I want to say that, yeah, for sure. There might be something that is really significant in that observation. D has the noble on the table. All of the swords are the same gray blue, and Conver, the queen, has the only red sword. Okay. When I am teaching tarot and working with tarot with beginning students, so I teach quite a few tarot classes, I want to remind students that there are intended meanings. There are intended colors, symbols, and so forth. And so we start learning what these symbols represent, sort of what we can expect to see on a card. And then we start learning some more esoteric meanings, and all of a sudden these new layers start to begin to appear. We begin to learn more about the elemental correspondences, and that those sort of messages start to come to the surface a bit more. Well, in the Tarot de Marseille, we don't have a lot of books and information about what these cards meant. These books, there's a little bit of information, but a lot of these books are intellectual analyses of the Tarot de Marseille. And the Tarot de Marseille, remember, is one that moved from country to country, from region to region, and there are regional nuances within many of these different decks. What's really interesting is the consistencies and the things that stay the same from deck to deck. So when you do observe something that appears significant, I want to encourage you to read it in that way. So if for some reason you feel like your valet d'épée wants to pick up that baton in his right hand and go play and not deal with the responsibility of the sword in the left hand, then let it be that. But if you are looking at the valet d'épée and want to and wonder, there's a tremendous focus about getting that sword into the scabbard without perhaps cutting his right hand. And then we can look at the direction and why 3 of these 4 cords are facing to the left and 1 to the right. Now, I was talking about the World card and this thought that I had about these changes in energy. And I need to go back and review other Marseille books, but when I initially studied the tarot and I wasn't aware of the eagle as a Scorpio energy, I thought, of course, the angel is air and, the angel is love and the bird is air. That just made so much sense to me. until I learned otherwise. So even if we're not using this as a reference point for the direction that the Knight is going, what we do know is that as we look at the cards, the Knight is going to the left. And going to the left, left is receptive. Left would be the heart. The heart is on the left side of the body, left-ish side of the body. Going to the right is more of an active movement. So however you're going to interpret that comment, I think it's kind of a poignant way to interpret the card. Yeah. So let's get back to the Queen and just think about the Queen of Swords for a little bit and why she might have a hand on her belly. And you can look at the decks that you have in hand. Because all of the ones that I've got here do not necessarily have the Queen with her hand on her belly. This Queen looks a bit like a Hierophant, actually, with the Prana Mudra in the right hand. For me, the belly is a vulnerability. And there's no bellies in Yonasios. They're all skinny as heck. It's her vulnerability. It's a connection to the feminine energy, for sure. The place where a baby would be carried. But I wonder, too, about that interpretation of, is she covering up a scar? And when I think about the Queen of Swords across numerous decks, I think she knows that pain of healing. And perhaps one of the reasons she chooses to isolate herself is because she doesn't want to feel that pain again. And maybe she, every time she changes her clothes, she looks at that scar, whether it's from a cesarean section or whether it's from a war wound or whatever it's from. She defines herself by it, and she's reminded of it. So that's because of the kind of work I do with the tarot that really kind of sits with me. And it makes me want to go and look at some of the Queens of Swords, which is so, like if you think about Waite Smith, that's very, very different. And I wonder if any of the Waite Smith inspired decks have one hand on the belly and one hand on the sword. Doesn't that give you a different impression of the Queen of Swords? It almost holds or captures her femininity. Gives me compassion for her. You can see it here in the Rivso as well too. But this one actually looks, well, the hand is moving in a different direction. But I think it's I think it's a really interesting conversation about the position of the hand. Now, if I compare or ask myself why this creator would choose to put, now it's a different hand because the sword is in the left hand, the prana, I call it prana mudra. It's a yogic gesture, but it's the same gesture as a hierophant, the symbol of the blessing. And it's so funny, I was just talking about this. We were doing the Hierophant card in Tarot Foundations too. I was just doing a broadcast before this. And how these questions just seem to come up in groups and make me rethink and reconsider cards that I've studied for years. So, sword is in the left hand, gesture in the right hand, hand is belly left hand, sword right hand. And I want to go back and look at the hand that holds the sword in all of these. But notice that the hand on the belly is the left hand. It's the receptive hand. So the feminine hand, the nourishing hand, is toward, we'll call it the belly. Protecting something. She's protecting something. Now, if you think of the tarot and different decks you've studied, what card would you call the little Queen of Swords? I'm not sure why I'm even asking you this. I think it has to do with the theme of protection and how we might protect ourselves, looking for symbols of vulnerability. And I don't feel that the Queen of Swords in any way is vulnerable. I think she stands in her autonomy, authoritatively. And yet there's kind of maybe a new poignant reflection that could help me in my interpretation and reading of this card. Okay, so let's go back and just observe which hand the swords are held in. So we saw that the valet has the sword in the left hand. The queen has the sword in the right hand. And you can check this across your decks. The sword is in the left hand. And the king has the sword in his right hand, I believe. If I can find him, because he had that ruler or whatever it is in his left hand. Some other tool in his left hand. So the king has the sword in his hand of aggression, of masculinity, of action, as does the queen. The two younger courts, the two more naive courts, have the sword in the left hand. Do they rely more on their intuition in order to get it right, whereas the queen and the king rely more on their experience? They're able to wield the sword, whereas the knight and the page don't have that same level of mastery of the element. And now if you change sword for words, intellect, knowledge. The page and the knight rely on, it's like when a student is navigating a text. It could be a university text. It could be a novel that they need to read for a course. And there's so many words that you don't understand. And there's different methods, of course, for trying to figure out what a word means. And often we rely on context clues to figure that out. Intuition. But these two courts, the Reines and the Roi d'Épées, they're so gathered, they're so collected, incredibly smart. And having conversations with these types of souls feels, I love having conversations with queens and knights of swords. I'm so stimulated by the vocabulary and the accurate use of language and the way that the polysyllabic words run off their tongue and they speak grammatically, and it doesn't matter what language they're speaking. There's such a finesse in the words and the language and the knowledge. And there's a funny thing about Queens and Kings of Swords is that if they get caught up in a conversation where, I think I want to ask this question again about these shoulder pads. If the King and the Queen of Swords get caught up in a conversation where they don't have the knowledge base and they don't know what they're talking about, my experience is that somehow they can navigate their way through that conversation, and you might never know they don't know what they're talking about. And that's simply because they have so much experience with language and words and knowledge that they can navigate it regardless of experience of the content or the topic. I kind of want to go back and pull some more queens. Sorry, I need to look at the queens again, but I want to ask you this. So please, will you come back in the comments and give me some thoughts on the epaulette of this king and the chariot and what they might represent. Now, what I was just reflecting on, looking at the camera, was the abundance of clothing on the queen, the abundance of fabric. And I guess that's pretty consistent across the queens. I was just kind of taken in by the amount of space that the Queen of Swords takes up on the card. You know, there's not a lot of white space on the card. And the reason I'm suggesting this is that in another aspect of reading has to do with this contrast of white space versus no white space, right? When the card is full of color. Just looking for the other queen. Cavalier, Valet, Roi. Oh my goodness. I don't know where she is. We've got, which one's missing? Cups. Cups are missing. Okay. So these are just, oh, she's the one that has the thing over her head too. She's the one that is the crown. The crown is protected. Do any of the other queens have a hand on their belly? Well, this one kind of does. Maybe they all do. No. Let me know. I mean, today I kind of have more questions than answers. This is an ongoing conversation, journey, not ending anything here today. All right, so let me know. The Suit of Swords is, I love the Suit of Swords. Why? And I know Dee said that early on as well too. Oh, let's go to your comment and then I'll just sort of wind this up. The King and Queen of Épées listen and are interested in what everyone is saying. They collect information because it might prove useful. Yes, so good point. The idea of voice, intellect, so voice and listening, right? Communication, that's all part of communication, which is part of this suit. The complexity of the suit is mind-blowing. And I also really love working with the energy of swords. It gives, I think, a lot more room for interpretation than many of the other suits. Yeah. Okay, so do you need a summary? I don't think you need a summary. There are a few questions. What do you think about Oh, and another thing about the Knight of Swords that I didn't mention was, maybe we talked about this last week, I don't remember. But this card has a kind of a bad reputation. This is a really dangerous character. This is the wild card. You never really know what's going to happen here. Whereas you have a little bit more information with the other knights and the other honors. And because of that perception, I find this idea of that knight returning to love so very powerful. Yeah. Okay. I will wrap up with that for today, and we will have a look at all of the Valley next week, and sort of dive into a conversation about the pages. All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I look forward to your comments post-processing, and have a lovely rest of your weekend. And thank you, Dee. Okay. Bye, everybody.